You ever notice how the moment you start improving your life, certain people suddenly have a problem with you? Not because you changed for the worse, but because you changed for the better. Today, we're diving into 5 psychological phenomena that explain why your evolution triggers other people's discomfort. And fair warning, this isn't about blaming anyone. It's about understanding human nature so you can keep growing without absorbing other people's projections. Reason number 1, you stopped being their emotional mirror. Here's something most people don't talk about. We unconsciously choose friends who reflect our own emotional state back to us. If you're anxious, you surround yourself with anxious people. If you're cynical, you bond over complaints. But here's what happens when you start healing those patterns. Suddenly, you're not reflecting their reality anymore. You're not co-signing their pessimism. You're not validating their victim narratives. And psychologically, this creates what's called reflective dissonance. They look at you expecting to see their own struggles mirrored back, but instead they see someone who chose differently. And that mirror breaking, it feels like rejection to them, even though you're just changing the channel on your own life. You didn't abandon them. You stopped abandoning yourself. But to someone who's still stuck, those two things look identical. Reason number 2, your silence became louder than their chaos. There's a strange power in silence that most people underestimate. When you stop oversharing, stop explaining yourself, stop engaging in drama, you inadvertently create a vacuum. And vacuums make people uncomfortable. Here's the psychology. People who thrive on chaos need participants. They need reactivity. They need someone to play the game with them. But when you go quiet, not cold, just calm, you're essentially saying, I'm no longer available for this dynamic. And that quietness, it's deafening to them, because now they're forced to sit with their own noise. Your peace exposes how much energy they're spending on turbulence. You're not judging them, you're just not joining them. But to someone addicted to drama, your silence feels like a spotlight on their choices. They'd rather have your chaos than your peace because at least chaos feels familiar. You stop performing your past self. Here's a trap nobody warns you about. People get comfortable with the version of you that serves their narrative. Maybe you were the funny one who deflected pain with humor. Maybe you were the helper who never asked for help back. Maybe you were the mess they could feel superior to. But when you evolve past that identity, something interesting happens. They experience what psychologists call role violation. You're no longer playing the character they cast you as in their life story, and that creates a problem for them because now the script doesn't work. Think about it. If you were the one who always needed saving, what happens to the savior when you save yourself? If you were the comic relief, what happens when you start taking yourself seriously? If you were the hot mess, what happens when you get your life together? Their sense of self was partially built on who you were being for them, and when you change, it forces them to reconsider their own role. That's uncomfortable work most people aren't willing to do. So instead of celebrating your growth, they try to pull you back into the old dynamics. They'll bring up old stories. They'll joke about the old you. They'll subtly or not so subtly punish you for breaking character. Not because they don't want you to be happy, but because your evolution requires them to evolve too. And if they're not ready for that, you become the problem for changing the dynamic they'd grown dependent on. Your boundaries exposed their entitlement. Here's what nobody tells you about setting boundaries. The people who get most offended by them are usually the ones who benefited most from you having none. When you start saying no without guilt, when you stop over-explaining your decisions, when you protect your time and energy, you're essentially removing access. And for people who got used to unlimited access to your emotional labor, your resources, your validation, that feels like punishment. But here's the psychology behind it. They never saw those things as gifts you were giving. They saw them as roles you were supposed to play. So when you stop, they don't think, wow, I took advantage of their kindness. They think, wow, they changed and became selfish. Your boundaries didn't create the problem. They just revealed how one-sided things had become. The anger isn't really about your no. It's about the loss of their unchallenged yes. They're not mad you changed. They're mad the imbalance became visible. And rather than examining their own expectations, it's easier to label you as the problem. Reason number 5, your growth is living proof that change is possible. And here's perhaps the most uncomfortable truth of all. Your transformation threatens their excuses. When you break generational patterns, when you heal your trauma instead of passing it on, when you choose discipline over comfort, you become walking evidence that change is actually possible. And for someone who's built their entire identity around why they can't change, that's terrifying. This is what psychologists call cognitive dissonance resolution through rejection. Basically, if they accept that you genuinely changed, they have to confront why they haven't. And that's painful. So instead, the mind does something fascinating. It rewrites the narrative. Suddenly, your growth becomes fake. You're showing off. You think you're better than everyone. You forgot where you came from. None of that is true, but it's psychologically easier than admitting, if they could do it, maybe I could too. Your existence asks a question they're not ready to answer. What if I'm more capable than I've been willing to admit? And rather than sit with that terrifying possibility, they'd rather villainize your journey. It's not personal, it's protection. But that doesn't mean you have to shrink to make them comfortable. So what do you do with all this? You keep growing anyway. You extend compassion without compromising your evolution. You understand that their discomfort is about them, not you, but you also don't need to convince them of that. Personal growth isn't a betrayal, it's a boundary, and the right people will celebrate your transformation, not resent it. Thanks for watching. If this resonated, let me know in the comments. And remember, you're not responsible for staying small so others feel big.